Hey guys, today let's solve an assumption question using the whiteboard. So here I have a question from Scholarinium. Let's open the whiteboard, and the first thing you probably want to do with the whiteboard is resize it as per your convenience. So when I'm working on an assumption question, I really do not want to look at the option choices when I'm doing pre-thinking. So this setup works very well for me. So here I can read the passage and I can view the question stem, but I'm not looking at the options. So now let's begin with passage analysis. Open up a text box and here we go. The farmers in Greenville use pesticides to effectively solve the problem of locust attack and help increase yields. Okay. The chemicals in the pesticides have been known to be associated with certain health hazards to consumers of the produce. Let's assimilate that. So farmers in Greenville are using pesticides, and what do we know about these pesticides? Number one, they solve the problem of locust attacks. Number two, they help increase the yield. And the next line gives you that number three, the side effect is the chemicals in the pesticide pose a health hazard to the end consumer. Okay, we know this so far. Let's move on. So even though the use of pesticides is the cheapest way of increasing the yield, the sale of such pesticide-laden crop produce stand to get adversely affected. So we got a few more data points about pesticides. Now we know that they are the cheapest way available to increase the yield. Okay. So now we have the contrast. So despite pesticides being the cheapest way to increase the yield, because of the inference is that because of the health hazards associated with pesticides, the sale of pesticide-laden crop produce is going to be impacted adversely. So because of point 3, the expectation is that sales will come down drastically. That's about it. That's what we got from here. Now let's move on. Genetically modified seeds not only fight off the locusts but also help increase yields at comparable prices. So we got multiple data points from here. So let's talk about genetically modified seeds. We'll call it GM henceforth. What do you know about them? They also help fight against locust attacks. They also increase the yield and comparable in terms of price. With whom? With P. So if we what we get from this is that genetically modified seeds provide the same benefits as pesticides, and they come at a comparable price point, that is they pretty much cost the same. Pesticides have a health hazard component that the author has clearly stated. So let's move on. Therefore, using genetically modified seeds is the best way to increase the yields in the next sowing season. So we have reached a conclusion. The conclusion is using using genetically modified seeds is the best way to increase the yield. Simple, right? And what was the logic used by the author? The logic is that genetically modified seeds provide the same benefits as pesticides and they cost pretty much the same, but pesticides have a negative health impact. So the logic of the author is clear, the conclusion is clear. So now we can actually do pre-thinking. Let's start with framing the falsification question. In what scenario would using GM not be the best way to increase the yield? Fairly straightforward, right? Now, if this had to happen, what would be those conditions? What would be those falsification conditions under which GM would not be the best way to increase the yield? The usage of genetically modified seeds would not be the best way to increase the yield. Now, the author has talked about the negative impact of pesticides, but what if genetically modified seeds are either equally bad or even worse as far as the health impact is concerned? So if that is true, then your conclusion would break. Using genetically modified crops would be even worse, or at the very least as bad as pesticides. In both these cases, you cannot conclude that using the GM seeds is the best way to increase the yield. So the assumption the author is making here is that GM seeds are not, GM seeds do not cause any significant health hazards the same way pesticides do. Fairly straightforward, right? If GM seeds cause significant health hazards, cause a significant negative impact on health, then you cannot make this conclusion. What else can we arrive at? So notice that the author is saying that using GM is the best way to increase the yield. What if there are other methods apart from using pesticides and apart from using GM seeds? For all you know, maybe a different type of irrigation can be a better method to increase the yield. We do not know. The author seems to be assuming that these are the only two methods that are available. So the assumption is no other methods exist which can give a better yield, right? So we've arrived at two assumptions, which is more than sufficient when we want to get into option analysis. In a test environment, even if you do one, you're good. So let's move on to looking at the option choices. We have the analysis here. Now let me put a text box for the options. So let's call option A, option B, option C, option D, and option E. And let's put in a line. I can cross out what is wrong. Okay, so let's start. Produced from genetically modified crops does not pose any significant health hazards for the consumers. Oh, this is exactly what we arrived at. This is exactly what our assumption one says. Genetically modified crops do not pose any significant health hazards. If it is true, as in if I negate this, then it will definitely break the conclusion. So we already got our correct answer, that's A. However, for the sake of completion and just to be sure, we should always cover the other options as well. So let's do that. Option B. Extensive trials carried out on genetically modified seeds have established that they can be used for commercial as well as cash crops without causing any harm to human health. This is an interesting option choice. It seems to be a strengthener rather than an assumption. Remember, an assumption by default is a strengthener. A strengthener need not be an assumption. So this is a strengthener. What that means is if you negate the statement, it will not necessarily break the conclusion. It's not a must be true condition. For example, let's try negating option B. Extensive trials carried out on genetically modified seeds have established that they cannot be used for commercial as well as cash crops without causing any harm. Okay, that doesn't tell us for sure that GM may not be the best. GM can still be the best way to increase the yield, right? At best, this is a strengthener. So let's move on. This cannot be the correct option. Okay. Option C. Switching to genetically modified seeds is unlikely to be significantly more expensive than the current usage of insecticides. This is again an interesting option, but what you should realize is it's not bringing in any new information. This is restating what we already know from the passage. We already know that GM seeds are comparable in price with pesticides, and option C essentially tells you the same thing. So, yet again, this is a reject case. Now let's look at option D. Apart from locus, no other factor is likely to cause a negative impact on the yield of crops. Again, at best, this is a strengthener. This is a strengthener. So it says that there is no other factor apart from locus that strengthens your belief that using GM seeds will be the best way. But it is not necessarily true that this needs to be there. So at best, this is a strengthener. Even if I negate this, the conclusion may still hold true, and that is why option D is also not the correct option. So even if there is some other factor apart from locus that can have a negative impact on yield, it could still be true that GM seeds are the best way to increase the yield. It's not a must be true condition. It's a strengthener, but not an assumption. So option D, we can reject on these grounds. And now let's proceed to option E. People will be more willing to buy produce from genetically modified seeds than from normal seeds. Yeah, of course. The problem with option E is that it's completely irrelevant. Your conclusion is about which is best, genetically modified seeds or pesticides, or if there's something else. It's not about people's preference. Whether people are willing to buy genetically modified seeds over normal seeds has nothing to do with this argument, and therefore it's an easy to reject irrelevant answer. So there you have it. We have solved this question and we have used the whiteboard, and So through this video, what we have done is we've used the whiteboard for an assumption question. So the things I want you to keep in mind is, number one, preferably cover the options when you're doing pre-thinking. Use the whiteboard for that. Number two, use short forms. There's no need to type everything out. You don't even need to write all the facts of the case. Only if it helps, only if you really need it. In this example, I found it easier to type out the facts of the case, but you don't have to do it all the time. And number three, option choice analysis. Again, it's really up to you whether you really want to put option A, B, C, D, E, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's up to you, but the idea is the tool will help you if you really get some practice on it. So I hope this video helps you. If you have any particular concept that you would like us to cover using the whiteboard, please feel free to let us know and we'll definitely do it. Thank you.